What's up, friends? Welcome back to another episode of NFT 365. And, I think there's no doubt about it that I preach the power and the importance of the blockchain. I think most of you know I live and breathe and love the power of digital. But I'm also a big fan of this, harmony between, technology and humanity, and really where technology can not only innovate but push us forward in what we think about in our day-to-day lives, right? How do we even track things? How do we, integrate and manage data? Right? I think it's unfortunate that a lot of the Web 2 world, or really a lot of the innovation, even with our iPhones, a lot of that was, what can we do digitally? And I could even put an argument from a marketer's perspective is that we still haven't really even figured out what is a true mobile experience, because we've taken a lot of desktop experiences and put them into this little device in front of us. And I think that's also where kind of the metaverse leads us. But there's this beautiful kind of harmony that I am excited to kind of dive into in all realms, right? From a standpoint of not only goods and services. I mean, if you're watching on our YouTube, I got Gary V's plushies behind me. I got bobblehead dolls. I kickstarted a really cool pillow company called Throwboy, which does a bunch of Apple. I have an Apple iPhone. I have the original iMac. All these little Throwboy pillows, and I think there's something kind of beautiful about all of that. But there's all of that is kind of not blockchain and not connected. And so excited to talk today on that. And we have a really great guest joining us. And James, excited to have you. Excited to talk, Clubhouse, some of the things that you have going on. But before we do that, welcome to the show, and go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit to our audience.
Yeah, I appreciate that. First off, thank you for inviting me here. It's an honor to be on with you. I'm a big fan, and I think anybody that cares about the technology and the future of as much as someone like you, we need more of you, right? And we need more of that. So kudos to being a pioneer in the space. James Costa here. I'm the founder of Clubhouse Archives and of CX Labs, which most people don't even know about at this point. Been in apparel now for, I guess, 23 years, designing, developing, producing men's, women's collections. I ran an apparel trade show for a number of years, and I have about almost 3.5 to 4 years of apparel technology experience with a PLM software that I was involved with. And then I got into Web3, and that was back in February of 21. I learned about NFTs. I mean, I was in cryptocurrency before that for a little over a year. I got very lucky and decided to pull the trigger on the tech, really on the currency side anyway, because I just had a feeling, and it seemed that it was going to change the way that we transacted in the future. And that led me to NFTs inevitably, right? A friend of mine, someone in the space, Greg Mike, big artist, tipped me off, and I was instantly went down the rabbit hole.
Nice. I love that. And I will say, the Clubhouse Archives name threw me off originally. I remember just, and for those that are listening, I talk a lot about Clubhouse and Clubhouse days, but that was the social audio app, right? Two separate worlds, which I think is an important piece. And I'm excited to have that conversation on like kind of a, clothing merch side of the house. Is, for me, I am like one of those, I have kind of my own style. We actually sold merch here for the podcast, but I've never, like, that space has not been mine. I'm one that has like kind of my own way, design my own shoes. Funny enough, my family, growing up, we had a frozen yogurt shop, and my dad's been a sales marketer in the candy business, but we had t-shirts that we sold, and like those t-shirts are still worn today, where people will be like, hey, I was at Fanzo's yogurt in Virginia Beach, and I got your t-shirt for the putt-putt place, and a couple of the things that we had there. So I've always been like a, I kind of like that brand connection and like, kind of the own style side. But I've like always looked at it as just like, it's a world that I've never really known, much about. And, I love the e-commerce plays. I love, where drop shipping has taken us. But for people that have been in this space as long as you have, right, there's like a whole different, context and world that comes to life. So, give us a little context on, like you said, you kind of found Web3. You've been in that space a lot. What was kind of like the first, like maybe, or what was the aha about the technology that you could connect and say, wow, if we could integrate this based on all the things that I've done and known, this could really make a difference? Was there one thing that kind of jumped out at you?
I mean, I'm going to be really honest. I was one of those individuals that just kind of got it the first time hearing it, when Greg was explaining it to me, he had me hook, line, and sinker, and I was hanging on every syllable that he explained. And he started talking about smart contracts and how you could tie that to the digital asset and how that could control things, basically as like a list of instructions of what to do if it were transferred, bought, sold, whatever. And that was fascinating to me. And I immediately was trying to figure out, how do I take that and marry it with physical apparel from day one? And I asked him actually on that call, I'm like, is there any way to connect these? And he actually had already known and heard of NFC chips way back when. He said that some people were actually using it to authenticate the artwork. And you could even tie that somehow back to the blockchain. So from day one, I was investigating, exploring, trying to understand more intrinsically what an NFC chip was, how it could connect a digital asset with a physical good, and how we could build a business around that. And that was literally from day one. So I've always been a student of the game in that respect.
Yeah, and I love that. I want to dive in like on all the different impacts it has, right? Like I'm a big sports guy, born and raised in Pittsburgh, so I diehard, all Pittsburgh sports, and I probably own 80 to 100 Steelers jerseys, and that's maybe even a low estimate. But I also went through this world of, when I started traveling and I was going to Korea a lot, I would come back with 60 jerseys that were either, let's just say, pulled off the truck, or, might have, we're missing like the Paul and Mitchell, kind of embroider on the back of it. And I remember like kind of that piece of it. And so I was part of the, problem. I didn't resell them when I came back here. They were pretty much Christmas gifts. My family has a lot of really cool jerseys that they got from, gifts for me. And like, for me, one of the use cases that I talked a lot about early on in this podcast was just the idea of like, how do we authenticate things, right? To actually like, prove that ownership. But I've also loved some of the other plays. I have Steve Aoki's, gear, his t-shirt here that he rolled out with his project originally. And I was like one of the first ones that kind of like trying to figure out like how do we connect some of those dots? But interestingly enough, a lot of the conversation that I feel like has had through our community is really like the metaverse play of style, right? Like where does that, piece of the puzzle go? So talk to me a little bit about like, where, Clubhouse Archives, like where are you at from like I love the vision and mission that you have on the website. It kind of like, hits me right in the feels on that side. But when you're thinking about some of those like activations and like where are some of the things that you're initially kind of looking this and saying, hey, this is tangibly what's going to make a lot of sense?
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up sports kind of jerseys and things, and we'll get back to that in a minute. But if you think about NFC chips and the connection between the physical and the digital, authentication would be the tip of the iceberg sitting out of the water.
Yep.
There is so much more that you can do with that connection between the two, right? Between the two worlds, if you will. And what we started to understand as I really kind of peeled back the onion layers on the technology, on all of the pieces that you could pull together to create an experience, was that there was a lot more than that provenance data, right? There was a lot more. Think about, like, let's take, for example, your jersey, and then we'll get into your question.
Yeah.
Imagine if one of those jerseys you could wear into the stadium, and they could scan the jersey and it could actually allow you into the stadium.
Oh, yeah.
But then beyond that, if you actually scanned at the concession stand or in the box or through interactions for the first time, the stadium has a lot more information about you as a brand loyalist of the team than they ever have before. And that's valuable data, not only for the brand or the business, but for the consumer as well,
Right.
because then they can accrue points and rewards for that, right? So it's the underpinning for loyalty in a new kind of way. And I think that that's a really interesting prospect. So if you think about Clubhouse Archives, we aim to be a tech-enabled brand, one of the very first from top to bottom, right, that explores that side of the business, right? How do we enable products that allow brands and consumers to communicate in an entirely new way? Because it is a two-way communication opportunity.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's the most beautiful aspect, right? And like I've said this from one of my favorite use cases that I know people in the podcast community love to quote it back, but like like I'm a I'm a sneakerhead. I have more hats. Like I definitely have an addiction personality to things that I love, right? And like for me, like the idea of like walking by a storefront, right? Like how many people go to malls now? But if I am in a mall, like being able to walk by something and see what I what I want there, or being able to customize things. And what I actually did in the live streaming space was like one of my favorite use cases was like people were, I was working with brands to embrace live video. And I said, like, you need to give people access to what you decide is on sale, what's in the store window. And we worked with a small store in Scottsdale, Arizona, and they would go live every Friday. They would hold up 4 or 5 items and they would let people that are watching live vote on 3 of them that were for sale the next day. And then they would vote on what the display was on the front store. And their sales, I mean, it's my favorite use case because it actually drove business, right? And there was people that were like, I didn't even care about what was for sale, but the fact you cared about my opinion mattered, right? And like that bar for like customer loyalty, customer connection, I believe is just so low that like the point where you were making where it's two-way, right? Like where we feel like they care about us, we're also giving them more data so they can customize our experiences. They can even prioritize like shifts rather than, having to guess, right? You can actually start to understand some of these nuanced things. I'm curious from like that side of the house, is where's like some of the limitations today? Is it the like the underlying tech from like proximity badging and that piece, or is it also like the limitations being on kind of like mindset approach on, because like anytime I bring it up, people are like, well, right now people are scared about using their data or leveraging their data, and I always caveat, no one cares if you're using my data to make my experience better and you're being transparent with my data. If you're not being transparent with my data and you're selling my data, or I don't know how you're actually using it, or you're selling it off and someone else is targeting me, we of course don't like that. So what do you look at as some of the like what are some of the barriers that you're kind of working through, like kind of to get this kind of through?
That's a great question. And look, let's be very clear. We're actually so there's 2 things going on. There's the branded goods and the Clubhouse Archives. And by the way, the name comes from reaching back in the archives of clubhouses of sporting teams and golf and crew and all of these things, and then pulling out garments that were kind of like time period pieces and then reinventing those in a modern way. So it's very much kind of a sportswear line. So that is the branded side of things, right? That is almost like our focus group. We have a community that is very engaged and that will help us, to your point, through that kind of two-way communication, shape and mold the future of that brand, right? The other side of that you asked is, look, we're solving a real problem with the infrastructure behind that, right? So you've got the branded goods, and then you've got that connection, right?
Yep.
How do you create infrastructure behind that allows a brand and a consumer to actually communicate? There's got to be something there. That is what we find most interesting because it solves a real problem. Second and third party data, to your point, people hate that today. They don't like it because it's being shared all over the place. And I don't want to say without our knowledge. We all sign the terms and services that we never read, right? And it basically says we could do whatever we want with your data, and you're still going to use our platform, and we all do. But the problem with that is it's being overcrowded. The costs are being driven up because of the amount of people coming into that sort of a channel, and the noise level is becoming so intense that it's very difficult for a brand to get their signal through the noise. So we see this kind of a connection as being what's called zero and first party data, like literally brand to consumer direct through the product. That is interesting. That is intriguing, but it does have some barriers, right? Individuals want to make sure that their data is not being used in those old school ways. The interesting thing about putting this on Web3 rails is you get a lot more control on the consumer side. And we're actually doing some things inside of that infrastructure that we're building to allow the consumer to filter the noise, right? So you're going to have a lot of control over what the brand even gets to say to you and what level of communication they get to have with you, and how your data is shared. And Web3 allows that. And I think that that's really unique and interesting. So from a consumer standpoint, it's probably getting over that and understanding and realizing like this is actually way better for you than the old, kind of the old traditional channels. Other than that, there aren't as many restrictions as you might think.
That's and I love the communication piece, right? Because let's face it, I think that is the biggest, it's a hurdle across all marketing, and we're even seeing it at a greater level right now because we've seen Apple kind of kill off some of the, the ability to target, right, and ability to do some of the personalization and advertising, and I think that also plays into a lot of the things when we think about this, like brand loyalty, connection, and it's funny, you have a great team of people on your team, and I know Steve, who was on the podcast earlier, and I think I saw D-Rock on there as well, and I actually knew D-Rock before he was an intern for Gary. I was actually there his day one as an intern, an unpaid intern originally. We were there together at South by way back when, and I think it was 2014. So I love some of like the connections of people and brands, and I would say like the piece that jumps out at me like as we think about this is like that idea of like when people say like, well, couldn't we have done that in Web 2? And like the answer is yes. There's plenty of like proximity tagging, and I remember I was at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona, and one of their big things in their event app was that they were going to be doing location based Bluetooth pop-ups with like time-based kind of advertising and giveaways, and it was actually really cool. This was 2019, so before that idea, and like I remember for the first time, we all know that feeling. You're like walking through like the booths, and you're like, you don't want to go get the swag, you're not even sure, but like I was walking and it said like you had been to these 3 booths that were this type of technology. This one is similar, and they want you there. And because they know you've been to those 3, they're going to give you this for coming over there. And I remember being like, why does not every event have that, right? And part of it was like, well, A, I have to opt into it, right? Like B, I have to have notifications on my phone. And let's face it, event technology, in my opinion, has been behind the curve in many realms. I'm curious, like your thoughts on when you think about like when you're looking at it from like the brand and like even like the reinvention, like because I think that's also part of the narrative, right? When we hear Gary Vee say he's making V friends for the IP and wants to be the Disney of the future, for a lot of people it's hard to wrap their head around like like imagine if you could have been there and part of the original Disney, and that and there probably were some people there. How are you looking at it from like the like from an early, like you said, you have some early adopters that are already part of your community, you're pushing that forward. What are some of the things that you see as like initial ways to kind of get adoption, I guess is probably the better way. I'm not a big fan of mass adoption. I like growth adoption. Like let's get people that are willing to allow us to grow. But like who are like what is some of those like maybe either target demos? Is it the Gen Z that you see as ones that are there, or maybe it's the nostalgia millennials? Who do you see as like kind of that way that we kind of kind of bridge that gateway?
I think Gen Z to nostalgia millennials are really kind of the core of who would use a tech like this. Because look, A, they're going to get it. B, they are some of the largest proponents of we want our data to do what we want our data to do, and we want control over that. Privacy, I think 71% today of individuals, if you poll them, say that privacy and their data actually matters to them, which is astounding because if you poll people on the environment, 55% will tell you that matters. So that tells you where data today lives in the minds, especially of the youth. And look, that's kind of why we're doing this as a part. You talked about like, could it be done in Web 2? Yeah, but there's one key thing we need to remember. Let's say I build an application in Web 2 and I'm a company, right? And I say, when you go to this event and we use Bluetooth technology to then give you this badge, right? That lives in your application. And oh, by the way, we control that. And if we want to delete that, we can't. Web 3 uses wallets. Right. And if I drop that into your wallet, I'm not getting it back unless you want to give it back to me. That is the difference between Web 2 and Web 3 in a nutshell, and why this technology is better. Can you do it in Web 2? You can do a lot of things in Web 2. They don't operate under the same pretense of it's yours once it's yours. And that's something that Web 3 really solves well. So I think it is definitely the Gen Zers into that kind of nostalgic millennial. I think that you talked about events, and I think that it's really interesting. Events can become gamified experiences now in a new and unique way, right? You've got things
Yep.
like AR that we saw with Pokemon Go.
Sure.
Having the ability to gamify things like that, and then once again, drop into your wallet and it's yours, and you've got these badges, if you will, that will allow you to accrue rewards. That to me is interesting, and I think we're gonna learn a lot about consumer behavior um,
Yes.
in the future as it relates to things like that, because people probably would have thought that that was a crazy concept with the Pokemon Go, and then people were walking out into the middle of the street and getting hit by cars because they were playing it so intently, right?
Yep.
So I think that there's a little proof there that consumer behavior is going to probably skew in that direction as we start to think about brand consumer relationship and some of the things you can do there.
Yeah, I think that that cross brand conversation is so powerful. Like I just love the idea that that I could have I because they're in my wallet, right? I can decide that I will allow these hospitality brands to have access to know that I have a Starbucks NFT, I have a Marriott NFT, I have a Delta NFT, and if they know that I am a loyal customer of those things, and I'm walking into a place that has a spa, they should have a much better feel of my like persona, right? Like even what they could offer and how those things kind of interact. The other part that really excites me is also like as a creator, content creator, like a lot of it is really broken, right? Like even as an influencer, like Chipotle, because I was tweeting a lot with my daughters going to Chipotle, they started to send me stuff, right? Like we have T-shirts that have we have, that my daughters and I have, but there's real no like proof that Chipotle knows what are we ordering, how like what
Right,
is the frequency, right? Like I
right.
just tweet about it, but there's also no like when I go into an individual store, I mean, talking about a disconnect, like my daughters even joked, they're like, Daddy, they look at us funny because they think like you used to work at Chipotle. Like that's why my daughter has this like, I think hers says like I'm burrito full, right? Is my daughter's like T-shirt that they got there. How do you look at like I think that to me is kind of like the like our connecting Web 2 social signals to our Web 3 wallets,
Right.
and then being able to like allow that data connection and then sharing it. I mean that has to unlock
That's wild,
things for
right?
brand.
Yeah, and it does. Like that's you just referenced down to the product level. That's zero and first party data, right?
Yep.
That's not a I am a fan of Chipotle. It is I am a fan of Chipotle and I eat this. That's really interesting for the brand, and look, it's interesting for the consumer because if you're willing to share that information, they can reward you for that, right?
Yep.
And that's your choice. You're allowed to make that, right? And that's kind of what we want to provide is that choice for the individual to say, I want to share directly with the brand, not through a second and third party, but directly with the brand this information because I want that connection with the brand. And if they want to reward me directly for that, great. We
Right.
want to provide the opportunity and the infrastructure to allow them to do that, right? But to allow the consumer to have that for multiple brands consolidated in one place. Because, like you said, when you start to think about affiliates and ways that can cross promote, that gets really interesting. A, and then B, I think if you think about the prospect of me wearing this cardigan to a location physically and scanning while I'm there, I'm now proving that I've worn this, and that becomes a true wear to earn. So you can assign value to specific articles of clothing. Let's say if I had a logo here and I know that's good for the brand if the consumer wears that, so I assign a higher value to that. And if they wear that and prove that they've done it, that's a win-win because they get the higher reward points. The brand gets the logo out there in the wild, and you also get data to know a little bit better of what individuals are gravitating towards and what they're willing to wear and not wear and those types of things. So you can start to find more data around the products that you're creating that you didn't have before.
So, I mean, I love all of this side, right? But the thing that jumps to my mind is like like the point of sale, integration and like, conversation. Like, how do we, and I give Starbucks a lot of kudos, right? The fact that they're able to update my stamps in my wallet as quick as they do, it blew my mind. Like, I remember thinking like, oh, I know this is, I mean, most, even Web 2 basic rewards, right? They tell you wait 48 hours, that side of the house. A lot of this conversation, there's real-time implementation, right? And there's also kind of situational. But like, I mean, like the sports, like my family's had season tickets for the Steelers since 1969. So we go into the stadium, like none of that context is ever provided. Right. And like, do you buy your jerseys from, the stadium, or do you buy your jerseys from one of your partners? And if you buy it from a partner that's a sponsor, how does that kind of show up for,
and that can, and see, now we can track that. And see, and the speed and the efficiency that you just talked, that's Web3. That's blockchain, right? And that's, once people start to really understand the technology and what it can do, I mean, you're giving all these, like you're throwing gems out of like perfect examples of exactly how we see the world. Like that is the future of consumerism, right? That is the future of experience. And I think you're talking affiliates, and imagine if the ticket holder from 1969, if that doesn't get passed down, because the information and the loyalty and everything, all that's, imagine if that could secondarily be sold.
Yeah.
That's a lot of value that people would pay a lot of money for.
Without
Web3
question.
provides the rails for those kinds of things to happen, right? And for all of that provenance data to be built up for whatever way it is. I just think that it's mind-boggling when you could go down so many different rabbit holes of how the technology can be used in this kind of way, right?
So many rabbit. I mean, my family's been to all the Steelers Super Bowls, or my dad went to the first four, and most season ticket holders early, you were given ones, and then all of a sudden they did a raffle, and it was frustrating as hell from my dad's point of view, was because it didn't matter. Like if you had 4 seats, you got 2 tickets in the raffle, and my dad's like, the majority of these people that are also in the raffle have either sold their past ones or never put their money up in escrow, but like they get the same value. And it's like, hold on a second. Like you should be able to know that I was in the LA Coliseum to see this Super Bowl. And like, a lot of that situational data. I am curious, your take. So I think I have three pieces of clothing that I've purchased that have some version of a Web3 integration.
Nice.
I will say one of the first things that I remember thinking was like, oh crap, can I wash this? Can I not wash it? Like where does that kind of fit in? But then I thought of it like how do I implement it? Like how do I think about it? Because I love the idea of like the B2C and C2B conversation, but I also think about it from like the C to like, person to person idea, right? Like, and I think that to me is like such a fun aspect. And I will tell you, I won't name the name, but they're one of the shirts that I've not got it to work multiple scenarios where like the use case was perfect. Like the person like asked me the questions, I had the shirt on, and I was like, I knew where the tag was, like, but it didn't work, right? The functionality wasn't there. And it was like
too much information now. Now I know exactly what you're talking about. But go ahead.
So, but that to me is like one of those things where it's like, okay, where is the it's not even a limitation, right? Like where is the ball being dropped in that? Right. And then also how much change has to happen in like even like the materials that we're washing clothes with, like, like because I mean, I think a lot of those things like right now we don't really care, but let's face it, like when we buy nice things, we always care to adjust our behaviors around them. But talk to me a little bit about like that kind of concern, because I know for a lot of us, that's kind of something that jumps to the top of our mind.
Yeah. So let's talk about NFC chips as the trigger today. That is something that's been around for 20 years, believe it or not. Dry cleaners have used them forever. They are machine washable. They up to a crazy, insane temperature. I think well over 200 degrees C, which is crazy. So that tech really kind of the ship has sailed on whether or not that's viable to use. I mean, they even create today buttons that are NFC tags that you could sew onto garments that you wouldn't even know. So, that will always improve though, right? Yep. So I think I know, I can't speak to that other than that probably being POC of will people interact socially with this, right? Kind of putting that concept out. And I actually thought that was brilliant, but I also thought that there was more to be done there. And when you talk about peer-to-peer communication, I think you're hitting on something really interesting that as part of our thesis, we believe in, because you can have, when you think about conceptually, if you think about NFTs and what they created for the first time, it wasn't about just being in the club. But if you think about trait-based communities, it was about being in the club and being a certain part of the club. You have these little sub-communities. I looked at that and immediately saw that being applied to brands today, because brands have traits. If I sell different types of products, those different types of products might have different types of communities that would sprout up around them, because, hey, I want to be in the cardigan club.
Right.
Like, that's a, you know what I'm saying? Like, and that's just a very simple, I don't want to go too
Oh
far
yeah.
down the rabbit. That's just a very simple example. There are very well-known products where that would be applied to extremely well, that those individuals have never known who the other individuals were. And now we have the ability to create those kinds of communities.
I
And
mean, I think that's one of the biggest mismarks of all of it, right? Because we want to belong to something,
that's
but
right.
we also want to find out who else belongs, not even at our level, but right is like has like that similar, dialed in, component, right? And I think that can go from, from tennis shoes to, physical event experiences
Right.
to like, like there's a difference between someone that is like, I'll use golf as an example, right? Like when, like for me, like my daughters, we watch golf. My daughter messaged me this morning. I said, good morning before she was going to school, and she was like, PGA Championship weekend, and I was like, my 13, like I totally didn't realize that, right? And like so, like I have like that connection with my girls, and like funny enough, like the disconnect of that is like, oh, I like golf also, and you're like, hey, we could, and maybe you like it from a spectator, you don't play. Like there's all those like those weird nuances, and I think that has always been one of those big barriers from like identifying and true ownership within these brand communities, because there has been like I couldn't connect with someone that has similar loyalty or similar, kind of buying habits, or even, and we all know that, like you join like a fantasy football league and then you realize like for some people this is the only fantasy football league they belong to. There's other people that like this is the eight and they're, counting down to March Madness. So I love like that component of it. I think that's also really missing from NFTs as a whole right now, even beyond traits, right? Because like, how do we connect people that are the active trade holders within an NFT collection versus the passive trade holders in that collection? Or like for me, like there's like a running joke in our community. I will have something that's pink or rainbow or black and yellow of whatever NFT I own. Like you can pretty much pick out the traits just knowing like myself, and like those things, connect to me at a deeper level. So I love that where all those moving parts are going.
Oh yeah.
Paint the picture for us. Like, let's say this is implemented at a scale, not like mass adoption, but at a scale. How do you see like someone that's like listening to this? They're like, what would this mean for me on like in a day to day, or like even just like one of their normal experiences? How would they experience it in the sense of, would it be something in their clothing that they would be aware of where it was, or how that was being connected? How do you see like kind of like that entire kind of like give and take, opt in, opt out experience kind of feeling for people in the future?
Yeah, look, if we see ourselves as kind of the infrastructure behind that process, that could be brand specific, right?
Right.
Like every brand could choose to call that out in a different way, and I think you have three examples where it might be called out in different ways. Um, so we would kind of leave that up to the brand, although we would make suggestions to them. How a consumer might interact with that is like, hey, if I had a NFC chip here in my sleeve, and the brand had it set up to every time you came into that physical location, and this could be any consumer packaged good. This doesn't have to just be
Right.
apparel. You can think of this in any kind of way, shape, or form. Hats, shoes, all the way down to like consumer products. If you can go to a location and scan and gain more points for doing that, it adds new value to your product and the way that you interact. And also, if a brand could have a push notification to you that says, hey, scan for, for a reward, for a surprise, and you scan and it launches some video, that only the holders get this bit of content, right? Because they are part of the exclusive club
Yep.
that talked about a new product launch that only they were going to have access to that drop. That goes back to the Supreme model that we know works,
Right.
right? This is just a really new way to interact, but it's at the product level. So imagine if that sneaker that everybody waited, 5 hours, 10 hours all day in line to get, if that sneaker was the key to the next sneaker.
Yes.
That's interesting. And that's a new type of interaction between brand and consumer that I think is going to be, it's going to be valuable, right? So that's just an example. I mean,
I
like I
love
said,
that.
it could be an access pass. That could be as simple as that, where you wear your jersey into the stadium, and you know what? You're scanning that jersey from now on, and that jersey physically holds a lot of value. Now, there's a digital asset to back that up, so God
Right.
forbid the jerseys ever, all the information's here, but you get the point, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I mean, and it also, how do we deal with bots and how do we deal with things? So
Right.
much of that can be removed, right? Like, I mean, I
Right.
loved the sneaker app when the sneaker app came out. And then I realized that there, as soon as people saw there was money to be made, they bought it and
Oh
it
yeah.
made it near impossible, right? But if they were able to say, like, they could actually know physically that I've gone into these stores wearing the
That's right.
product, right? Like, I've worn the product into these experiences, and that data is be able to share, and they're able to reward that. Right now, the actual super fan is being taken care of. Right now, we
Oh yeah.
we we establish those things that I like the compounding things too, right? Like, I just really think people haven't even got there yet, right? Where it's like, not only was I wearing the sneaker, but I also happen to wear a Lids hat that I had bought at Lids,
Right.
and Lids is a partner of yours at a
Right.
stadium, and you're now able to pop up, and because you both are, sponsors that stadium, you're able to give me a deal, split the cost on that, and also identify, I mean, a persona. I think it's game changing.
You get one set of value for just the jacket. You get a different set of value if you end up showing up with the jacket and the hat, and you get a entirely off the chart value for the full outfit. Maybe so that's kind of the gamification that I talked about, where you're starting to pull affiliates and forming brand new relationships between brands that didn't exist before, because that's how the consumer dresses.
Yep.
I don't buy to wear head to toe. I buy for a specific part of that outfit, right? But all those brands should be working together,
Yes.
because that's how the consumer's wearing it. So to your point, that makes a lot of sense. And that's kind of around our thesis of how we see the consumer getting benefit from those. Because look, just because I buy 100 pieces from a brand doesn't make me a brand loyalist.
Yes.
That makes me someone that spent on 100 pieces. Am I wearing any of those, or are those sitting in my closet? We want to truly reward those individuals that are using the product and actually promoting the brand. I think that's where we'll see that kind of engagement being rewarded, and that's just like a whole new really endeavor. If you think about it, it's like a whole new frontier.
It is. It's an unlock at a level that we haven't even thought of, right? And we for those people that voted on the privacy thing, right? Like, I would argue most people's even understanding or view of privacy is so misconstrued. And like, my background in cybersecurity, a lot of the things that, like, when people would worry about one thing on privacy, and then I would look at their phone and I'm like, do you know what you have enabled? Like, yeah, I don't care about people knowing that. And I'm like, well, with that, I now can do more things. There's a lot of like that I think, understanding of some of that, but there's also like, I don't think people identify a lot of their current behaviors that are triggered. Like, I started using Lyft when Lyft integrated into Delta Airlines as a bonus, right? Like, I never cared. Uber or Lyft never really bothered me. Whichever one showed up, whichever one, less. But all of a sudden, when Delta connected that points, right? Like, but like, no one's ever rewarded me for taking a Lyft to the airport to get my Delta airplane to fly and stay at a Marriott, which is that's literally my loyalty chain right there. I'm doing it this weekend. And like, how interesting would it be that they could not only map that, but like, they could see that, each one of those legs, that I'm loyal, the frequency of it. And I that to me is such a fun unlock that allows better marketing, better advertising, and let's face it, better use of data, which I think is the whole piece of privacy.
It creates a better experience based on the use, and it's direct between the brand and consumer. So the brands aren't going to want to sell that to other brands. Like, that's their own data of their own consumer interaction, which is why zero and first party is so important. And that is the future. Like, this won't be the first time you hear about zero party and first party data. You're going to hear about it the same way we hear second and third party now. But it is new, right? For the most part. I mean, text messages technically are zero. Nobody's doing anything innovative through a text message, right? This is obviously a lot more beyond that in terms of what you're receiving and the type of experience. But that is an example, right? We know that that's direct, though, right? But texting someone, not the most efficient way, I think, for someone to gain favor.
No, we've seen that go horribly wrong. Yeah, there's a lot of bad examples on that side. For those that are listening and maybe they're interested in learning more or joining a community of people that are talking about, what does that look like? How can people get involved or kind of be more dialed into what you have going on?
Yeah, I mean, look, you can always join our Discord, and you can find that through our Twitter page. We're very active on those two platforms, and that is at Clubhouse Arc NFT if you want the Twitter profile there. And then look, we are building out, as I said, something kind of on the back end of this that will release more information, that will have a whole new subset of community to be able to join. Whereas the Clubhouse Archives brand will kind of be really the R&D, if you will, and the test case of how we build this whole thing out, and proof of concept through community. We will have an entire other ecosystem that individuals will be able to join and partake in as well.
Well, you got me excited. I was excited for this conversation, as you can tell. Like, this to me is like, this is where I get excited. Like, I mean, I can be a degen any day of the week, but I mean, for me, when we start talking about, pushing the limits of, where technology, helps us as customers better understand our own experiences. And, like, I'm the guy I upload my Apple Watch data for my doctor so they know all of my behaviors. Yeah. If my Adderall for my ADHD is prescribed at a much better level than I think almost anyone else's, because I've opted in to give up that data,
Right.
because they were like, do a sleep journal. And I was like, yeah, good luck with that. Like, I would do that for like 2 days and then forget to do like my own sleep journal. But I was like, wait, don't I have a device that's already logging that like, could you just tap in and you could get more of it? So you could tell me, like, if I'm not getting enough steps or, some of those other behaviors. And I'm excited to see that go into products, excited that go into to marketing, and hopefully, I think also change some of that, like, brand, right now, I think it's a very one-to-many relationship. And like, if we can change that to where it's many to many and many across, right? Like, we can start to get to know, others that share some of our same behaviors. I mean, that I think changes so much, in a lot of our experiences in our everyday life. So yeah, this was awesome. I'm excited for, everything you're working on. Love that you're, kind of tapping in, and, as more innovation happens, we'll bring it back on for sure. And you can update us on a lot of the adoption there. But anything you want to leave people with? Anything you want to wrap up with here?
No, it's funny you mentioned the Apple. My watch was like on my desk buzzing over there. I kept looking, I'm like, what is that noise? And you literally started talking about it as I was putting it on. No, I mean, look, yeah, as we uncover more, I mean, I actually probably said more than I even should have, but I think you got the idea, and I think people kind of get the idea of what we are creating with CX Labs and the Clubhouse Archives. I would just say keep checking back in. I would love to come back when we have more to share in terms of very specifically, what that product is even called. We do have that, but we'll kind of release that as it comes. And once again, just a big fan. Love how you're driving the space forward. We need more of you out there in the world as pioneers and promoters of the space. And just honored to have been on here. So I appreciate it.
I appreciate that as well. And I will tell people that are listening, like, now that you heard this piece, go back and listen to the interview with Flyfish Club. When we had them on the podcast, like, there's a lot of, like, people love that interview, but I also think there was a lot of, like, clarity where I was getting excited and people hadn't seen some of these dots that can be connected at like a really cool level. So that's definitely one I would recommend. We'll put that in the show notes. We'll put in the show notes a lot of the links that were shared here as well. And, James, thanks for, jumping on the podcast. Thanks for the kind words as well. And, I think for all those listening, right? Like, I feel like I went on a Starbucks. I was drinking the coffee, not the Kool-Aid, of Starbucks as a great use case. But it's because, like, these are the use cases like this one here, where we start moving people's mindset to actually shift to recognize, like, wait, there's data and ways that we can use the blockchain that unlock things that we haven't even thought about. It's not about, like, replacing something. It's about unlocking things that, like, we need to be able to connect some dots, be able to empower us as individuals. And this to me is, the most exciting aspect of all Web3, and, just a really cool taste of that. So yeah, thanks everybody for listening. As always, if you have ideas, if you have use cases, you have things, throw it out at us. We're always open for, unique activations and ways that people can, use this amazing technology in front of us. So until next time, my friends, make it a great day. Cheers.